Hi everyone. This is my interview with Jazz Winnipeg Artistic Director Michael Falk. We talk about the upcoming festival, about what goes into curating a festival, about some of the exciting things that he sees happening for jazz in Winnipeg in the future, and a lot more. We also get into his history in the local music scene, in pretty much every aspect of the local music scene, from his current role to his early days as a musician, to working as a manager, to running a label, Head in the Sand Records, and it's just overall a very interesting discussion. Full disclosure, I do freelance work for Jazz Winnipeg, but I don't think there's a conflict of interest here. Legitimately, I would have wanted to talk to him about the festival, whether I was doing work for them or not. This is also my first attempt at trying to record with the new equipment. As you can tell, I still have a bit of work to do. Mike sounds great on the recording. I sound a little bit distant, so I have some practicing to go on as well. I'm really happy with the recorder that was crowdfunded. I'm blown away by the support that I've received by listeners. And, as I get more experience working with it, it's just going to get better and better. So thanks again. What you're hearing on this episode is the new recorder, but I need to do a few tweaks to get it to sound exactly how I want. I'd also like to ask listeners of the podcast to check out our friends at Dub Ditch Picnic. Chris, who owns the label, who is a past guest on the show and has been very supportive of the podcast over the years, is dealing with some medical problems, and he's really in need of some cash. And if you can go to the Dub Ditch Bandcamp or go online at Discogs, and all the various places you can pick up his stuff, and throw some cash his way by buying some of the catalog of Dub Ditch, of Sundowning, it would be a big help. If you go to the Dub Ditch Facebook page, you can read the full details of what's going on, and why he's kind of rushing to sell all this stuff off. It's an incredibly deep, interesting, unusual catalog of music. A lot of it's released only on cassette. There's a lot of reissues of local stuff that probably otherwise would not have been heard by this generation of music fans. And it's just generally a really awesome label and a good guy who's done a lot for the local music scene. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at the Park Theatre, Winnipeg's premier concert and event venue. If you want to find out all the great shows they have coming up, go to myparktheatre.com.
You're listening to Garbage Hill, Winnipeg's first podcast network.
Welcome to Which Place Radio. I'm in my own house for a change, which is really different. I mean, usually I'm at like a food court or a Robin's Donuts or the back of someone's car, but it worked out this way that I'm at my own house, so that's we'll see how it sounds. I don't think I'm going to make a habit of it, but I'm here with the artistic director of the Jazz Winnipeg, and you have a lot of other past titles and other things you've been involved with.
Yeah.
But I think maybe the best way to start things off is if you want to just introduce yourself and maybe give just a quick Coles Notes sort of history of what you've done in the music scene, because I know there's been a lot over the years.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I'm Michael Falk. I book the Jazz Festival and kind of oversee all of our programming and that stuff. And then leading up to, I guess before I started this gig, I've run sorry, my brain is...
It's okay.
Yeah, let me just dig into that again.
Well, maybe just to interrupt you for a second. Before I knew that you were doing the jazz thing, I was aware of you as the guy from Les Jupes and the guy who was running Head in the Sand Records. Yeah. So maybe that's a starting point. Is just sort of what is your background in the local music scene? I guess because it seems like the Jazz Fest is maybe a bit of a leap from what you were known for previously, right? So.
Yeah, totally. I ran a company called Head in the Sand for... I guess we started putting out records seriously in 2009.
Okay.
And kind of the Head in the Sand grew at the same time that I was also trying to grow my band Les Jupes. And so the label, I think at the time, with the Royal Canoes' first record and the Liptonians and the Record of the Week Club, and then kind of having a little bit of a scene there, and then also starting to like branch out and sign bands from beyond, and like really look at it as a business venture and as a way to support some musicians that I love and find ways to kind of help get some music that I really love out into the world. And So I started working with a band called Roca Code from Vancouver. I ended up signing a band from Iceland and releasing a band called the Opera Organ Quartet.
Okay.
And that record is still just really unbelievable, and I'm really honored and glad that I got to be a part of that one. And so that was kind of the label side. And then and then a few years ago, I started getting into a little bit into artist management. Took on a couple artist management clients. That kind of came out of, like, kind of throughout the whole period. I've always written grants for artists, so kind of like just a little thing on the side, or it can support musicians that maybe don't understand that process fully, or
don't want to do it.
Don't want to do it, or even like you don't have the time to do it, or would rather assign their brain energy to other things.
They want to do the creative part, and then there's the whole marketing and all that other stuff that is...
Totally. So I've written, I've probably written 100 marketing plans for different musicians in Winnipeg and beyond, and kind of done, a bunch of that kind of core, I don't know, I like to call it map making, helping an artist kind of like look at their business, look at the music business, and look at kind of what the path forward for them can be. And then
that kind of leads in well, I guess, to the jazz.
Yeah, totally. Like there's a lot of that with the festival. Maybe just being on the other side of that role in the festival chair, but and then as an artist, Leju put out a few records. We toured all over North America and Europe for a few years. And then through all of that, I've also produced records and made records for bands. And I'm one of the owners of Paint Box Recording. I'm not really taking on any clients these days, but it's Lloyd and Rusty are doing a bang up job on their own over there. So I still show up kind of once a month and kind of muck around with some stuff, and and I kind of do some admin work for the company, and I'm kind of involved in kind of behind the scenes a little bit more in the studio, but and really glad that space is really thriving, because we're busier than we've ever been. Lloyd and Rusty have got a lot of repeat clients coming through, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
And we've been able to kind of expand our footprint at the studio and start doing some renos to kind of just make the space a lot more functional and comfortable for musicians. We never had a lounge before, right? Like we had a studio where you just kind of walked in and there's the studio. And it's like, if you're a 7-person band, it's like, where do the 6 people that aren't doing anything go? And it's like, well, off into the wilds of Charles would you go? Around, and so it's nice to kind of have a space where they can chill out and read some magazines or whatever. And, so I guess that's all kind of part of it. Like, kind of like a little trifecta of music industry, artist services via label and management work, and then my own music making, and then the studio.
Okay. So you kind of got your hands in almost every aspect of it.
I've done almost everything that you can do.
Yeah.
Some of it well, some of it not well.
Is there, do you have a preference for one element of all that kind of trifecta, like you said? Or
Yeah, I think I got to the point, especially both of my management, I guess coming out of the management side of things, when those 2 projects kind of, and my participation in them ended, I just kind of realized that me working, like fully working for another musician, wasn't a great match. Okay. So, and I think part of that, if I'm honest with myself, is that as an artist, I expect certain things myself as an artist.
Sure.
And if I'm not seeing that in my clients, then it just makes it really difficult to justify why I'm putting this energy into something that where there's X, Y, Z that still need to happen and they're not happening, and it's like, well, you just kind of know, it's like, well, that means that this is not going to really work. And so
right.
And I think also it's just like when you're doing that, and if you're kind of carrying a bunch of that workload, and the other, like, for myself as an artist, I've spent a lot of energy learning the music industry, and maybe to my own detriment, I don't know, but because there's lots of musicians who don't scrap that part. I put a lot of work into learning the industry.
Yeah.
And that's helped give me the tools to be flexible with what I can do. But at the end of the day, I think what drives all of it is that I'm a musician and I'm an artist, and in my role as the AD at Jazz Winnipeg, it's I take that artistic part seriously in that I get to make this big mixtape for the city every year, and bring a lot of music that I get really excited about and that our office gets really excited about to Winnipeg, into the city, and hopefully like, I guess for myself, like, music makes my life a lot better. I love how music has impacted my life and kind of taken me on a course and a journey, and I think I kind of hope that through the festival that we can give people really amazing music experiences with stuff that they might not have ever heard before, might not have whatever, or stuff that they do know but maybe didn't have the opportunity to see, right? I think like this year the reaction to Brian Blade playing the festival, for example, right? Like, there's all these people that are super excited about it, and like.
Well, I think when I read that he was playing the day the lineup came out, I had just been listening to one of his records like a few hours earlier, and I was like, wow, this is great. Yeah.
That's awesome, and it's like, and that's the kind of thing that kind of when you're booking a festival, you don't really know, like, you don't really know how many people are into an act. It's like there's a fair amount of guesswork that goes into it, and you try to do as much research as you can into kind of what people are listening to locally, or what they where some appetite might be. But when we announced the Human Rights Museum show, I figured Cecile and Josh would be the ones that would get the most of the love, and there'd be like a little pocket for Brian, but it was like everybody was like, Brian, yes.
That's what I've heard too from people I know who are going to the show.
Yeah, exactly. So and we ended up moving which stage Brian was going to be on because of that, and I think it it's really cool that you just kind of I'm really glad. I've driven all 3 years that I've booked the festival now. I've been trying to get Brian to come, and this, we figured out how to do it this year. With this Human Rights Museum gig, it kind of things fall into place for us in a different way that to make shows and artists like that possible for the festival.
Were you dogs making some noise
here? Right. Hey, Pooch. We can pause for a bit.
Yeah, okay. If I remember to cut this out, I will. If not, we'll just keep it in there. It's cool, but
hey, everyone, we're petting a dog right now.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Don't shoot my water pup.
Get out here. So another, I guess, like, as far as jazz itself, were you always interested in jazz, or is this like a more recent thing for you?
No, I've loved jazz like my entire music listening life, or whatever. Right? I think. I wasn't trained as a jazz musician, and so like I think, people have known me as an artist that plays a certain kind of music, and but like there's been a pile of records that have been super important to me, and I think the live experience with jazz has always been the one that has kind of always been really, really vital for me, and a lot of really great experiences traveling and going to jazz clubs in cities, and having some like lots of really amazing surprise experiences, and I think trying to then bring some of those into the festival, and kind of how we think about spontaneous music discovery, and for me a lot of those experiences have happened in jazz clubs like in Madrid and New York and San Francisco and Barcelona and Berlin and all these places that I've been, and then wanting to kind of do whatever we can to start creating some of those experiences here around the music. And so I think like so I know that there's like a little contingent of people that are like, oh, he doesn't even like jazz.
Right. Well, that's what I was getting at. I was legitimately curious if you were a jazz guy, but like, before you started doing this, because I could see definitely some people once you get involved in the festival, you're kind of surrounded by it, right?
Yeah, so totally. And like I love it. I think that like what I love, there's a deep thoughtfulness to a lot of jazz musicians and the music, and there's a lot of people that care really deeply about what they're doing. And I think every year I go to the Winter Jazz Festival or conference in New York, and it's a really great weekend where you get to just bounce around all the jazz clubs in New York and just see stuff nonstop, and you just kind of see 10 shows a night and kind of OD on it, but it's like, but in all of the kind of like when you're immersed in it there, like there's just this feeling and the way the artists carry themselves and the way the artists talk about the music and about each other and about the process and the history and this is like, for me, this is mostly like I'm going to check out new jazz, right? Like this is, I'm looking for stuff that's people that are making new music and people that are making new records and trying to do new things with the in the genre and there's a really beautiful life and community to all of that, which I really love to see, and I think that I think that there are people in Winnipeg that know that and get that and want to see that as well, and they're and so I think that I think.
Do you think there's maybe difficulty with the idea of jazz with some people? Because I've often heard from people who aren't into jazz, and I've been like, let's go to a jazz show, and they're a little hesitant. It's the idea that it's this kind of self-contained little universe that they're not part of. I mean, especially in Winnipeg, because I'm sure in a lot of cities, because a lot of the players are all on each other's records, each other's bands, and it's kind of a really tight-knit group. So how, I guess, as the person putting together this festival, how do you open that up and make it sort of more accessible to someone who maybe doesn't know much about jazz and wants to check it out? Like, how do you kind of break that open so it's accessible?
Yeah, that's crucial for us, because I think when you have the same 50 people in the room, like those 50 people can only buy so many tickets, can only are only going to go see so many shows, and so I think and I think in that context as well, like, I mean, a little bit of on the business side, like jazz has 4% of the market share and dropping, right?
Sure, yeah.
And in Winnipeg, that's global. So let's talk Winnipeg. It's probably 1% of the market share, and dropping. And so,
despite a lot of amazing artists coming out of Winnipeg,
exactly, And so I think, so in that context, sorry, I had a few thoughts. You may need to edit me a little bit here. I had for a second, I had my path here, and there's kind of like 3 things I wanted to hit. Club. Okay, give me the question one more time.
No, I forgot what the question was.
Oh yeah. Okay.
No, it was about the kind of making jazz accessible.
Oh, right, accessible.
People who maybe think it's a closed circle.
Clubs, okay. Yeah. So at the festival, there's a couple things that we've been doing very deliberately, and one is that we've been putting more like high level touring artists out on the Old Market Square free stage.
Yeah.
And that's been super deliberate because we want to grow the audience for that music, and so the only way to do it is by giving people a great experience with it, right? So that when that artist comes back, those we can sell some tickets and build that audience for them, and then we can bring the artists back again and bring the artists back again.
And they can take the risk by going to the show because it's free.
Totally. And so I think that for us, it's a way. It's kind of the way the folk festivals work, right? Sure. They all bring an artist to the folk festival. The artist comes back 6 months later, plays the West End Cultural Center, sells 100 tickets. They play the folk festival 2 years later after that,
stage,
and then they come back and sell 300 tickets to the West End, and maybe they play the Burt eventually, whatever. Like there's like a path for an artist to build an audience through that network that within Jazz Winnipeg hasn't really been doing that for within my experience of the festival in my kind of adult life, and most of the other jazz festivals in the country aren't doing that. It's not something that's built into the model, and in terms of and I don't even know how much it's built into the jazz musician culture either, right? Because it's such a culture of one-off gigs and a lot more spontaneity in a lot of fashion.
Sure, yeah.
But what that means is that you're kind of like you're imposing a ceiling on yourself, and I think that what we want to see more of is artists pushing past that, and artists being able to sell real, to grow a real audience, both in Winnipeg and in other cities, and be able to actually sell tickets and make you make more money that way, and you can have some more longevity that way, and you're not just stuck in the corner of a restaurant playing $100 gigs for 20 years and
which I'm sure a lot of people have
totally. There's like the whole music scene in the whole jazz music scene in Winnipeg is we don't have a jazz club, right?
Yeah, which is insane.
And I think a lot of this comes back to that too, is that because there's no, even times change for the jazz community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's a club down Pembina where a jam happens every week, but that's just part of it, and it's totally the wrong location.
Well, there's the Marty Jazz thing too.
There's
right?
Marty Jazz, which is one night a week again, but like, you know, Saskatoon and Edmonton both have clubs, and Minneapolis has an amazing club called the Dakota, and I mean, obviously you go further east and every city has multiple, but I mean, in terms of just like the Midwest, and you know, we're a little hole in a really great tour route for artists, right?
Yeah,
and so where artists can do Minneapolis, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, and maybe if the money then works, they get down to Vancouver and Victoria and whatever else. But but that's not really happening very much, and part of that is because we don't have that room that's making that happen. And so, where you know that okay, Thursday night it's like basically Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's nothing but jazz in this club. And
you're easier to book those
totally
artists.
and you know that your Friday and your Saturday shows are always going to be touring artists. Your Sunday is always going to be the local showcase. Your Thursday is always going to be student night or whatever it is, right? And so you kind of have your four, you have a place that becomes ground zero for the community. And so that's something that I think about that a lot, because I see us lacking that.
Is there a way for Jazz Winnipeg to somehow parlay the success of the festival into something like that, or with other people?
Well, I think I think it's the kind of thing where multiple people need to be at the table, because I think if it's just us, I mean, I think our organization is already like, I don't see how it fits into the organization the way we're structured, as if we were to do that as a standalone. But I think there's definitely partnership opportunities, and I think that the Asper Series benefits. The university, like the School of Music, would benefit.
Totally, yeah. We'll give their students a place to perform. Yeah.
Exactly.
And to end up to check out.
And to see the touring artists that are coming through, that would be coming through all the time. Like, I think, like, from the musician's standpoint, I don't think that they see a lot of examples of the kind of activity that maybe the festival is looking for, or the level of kind of like the I'm called the total package or whatever, right? Where like some of the bands that we've got coming from the festival this year from Montreal or Toronto, for example, like I think the way they've all learned how to present themselves in a certain fashion that Winnipeg musicians just haven't been asked to do or forced to do, or and I think so. Like, there's we definitely get a little bit of chafing coming back our way, from like, hey, how about let's step up our photo game, let's step up our website game, let's
and that's an issue that a lot of bands of any genre are facing.
Totally, right? Like every indie band at the Goodwill or the Handsome Daughter,
they have to deal with that also.
Exactly. And so it's like, I think it's just, it comes down to at the end of the day, what do musicians want, right? I think if you want to just do this thing that you kind of play around this little circuit and you don't really want much more than that, and that's good for you, then great. But if you want something that's a little bit bigger, and you want to be able to play other cities, and you want to have an audience that you can grow with and can grow with you, and that through that process you can kind of find more creativity and write more and release more music, and like there's kind of I kind of realized that there's kind of two models that exist, and in Winnipeg almost all of the jazz community, just by the default nature of what's available in Winnipeg, has been play in the corners of restaurants, and then maybe and then for a bunch of them play the festival every year, and then play Asper Jazz once every now and then, like and play Marty Jazz a couple times a year. It's like this. It's just the same.
They cycle through the same.
It's
shows,
the same thing cycling through, and none of it builds. And none of it's about building your audience, right? None of that,
because the same people are going to all
the
shows.
Exactly, right? If you're playing piano at the Palm Room at the Hotel Fort Garry, it's a beautiful space, lovely environment, but like no one is going to see you, right?
No,
if you're Sam,
they're there for a drink.
They're there for a drink. You are quote unquote live music. You're totally interchangeable.
Doesn't matter how good you are.
Yeah, you can be amazing, but no one is going to your show at the West End Cultural Center 2 months later.
No, they probably don't even know your name.
Yeah, exactly.
You're just a guy in the background playing piano.
Yeah, and so I think that, I think for a lot of musicians in Winnipeg, that's just reality, and that's just how it's been for a long time. And so I think that, but on the other side, there's the side where you don't ever take those gigs.
Right.
You don't, and you only do gigs that are about your act and that experience with your act.
Right.
And selling tickets to that show and building that ticket value, and then doing that in cities across the country and then across the continent and then across the world, and having a path that, fully admittedly, there's a lot more risk.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a lot more investment needed. There's a lot more determination and a plan and a vision that you need to have all of these things. You can't just be like, okay, I'm going to go, tour Europe tomorrow. Yeah. It's like, no, it's like there's a lot of steps that have to go.
Point,
yeah. And so I think that, I think that musicians, I think like within the festival, we operate in that model, right? Where we need artists to be able to sell tickets when we bring in artists to Winnipeg.
Right, their name has to work. It can't be
their name has to work, right? Yeah, and I think that the local musicians don't always fully get why that is, and it's but it's like if we hire Nora Jones to come to Winnipeg and play a show,
people are going to see Nora Jones,
right, and the way the festival is structured, that show has to stand on its own, right, and so if we hire, this is why I kind of like the Brian Blades, Cecile McLaurin Salvant, like that, like the that kind of tier of jazz artists for this festival becomes very difficult, because really the only people that are buying tickets to those shows are the jazz lovers. Absolutely. It's not necessarily, Joe and Jane Public that are going to be super interested in those shows.
Yeah.
But there aren't enough jazz lovers buying tickets to make those shows work at the fees that those artists command, right? And so I think, and that's a longer, I look at that as a bigger picture thing that reflects the lack of jazz club, and that reflects that we don't, that we're a small city and a small market, and most people grow up in the suburbs listening to Power 97 or whatever,
sure,
and so I think culturally that core framework isn't there where Brian Blade can come into Winnipeg and sell 700 tickets, whereas he shows up in Montreal and it's like, you can put him in a theater and it's going to work, but in Winnipeg it's like the numbers don't work, and so
just based on what the preferences are overall in the city.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that we're really cognizant of that, and I think within those those limitations, try really hard to present as much amazing jazz as we can that also doesn't bankrupt us. Sure. Right? I think that's always
right, you don't be spending all the money in names and then no one cares, no one knows who they
exactly.
are. Yeah. Okay, well, this is maybe a two-part question. Feel free to answer it however you wish, but do you think there's benefit, first of all, on the local level, for local jazz artists to be getting more involved in the wider music community? I mean, instead of just taking those back to the restaurant gigs, playing at a show at the Goodwill maybe with a bunch of indie rock bands or a punk band and
totally.
And then the other question that kind of relates to that is in booking the festival, is there? I'm assuming you have to balance getting the music for the hardcore jazz audience and then getting some of the artists that aren't necessarily jazz but are more appealing to the general audience, right?
Totally. Well, okay, so let's dig into the first one. What was the first one again?
The first one was about, I do want to forget both of them, so I speed about it. The first one was about local jazz artists.
Right, totally.
And then can they fit into
and the siloing of a jazz community, right?
Just blend it all together.
Totally. Right? I'm biased because I grew up listening to a pile of stuff, right? And it's like where Stan Getz records and Charles Mingus records were on the shelf next to Rancid next to Kristen Hirsch or next to so I think like there's like Sonic Youth has equal value in my life as much as insert whatever. So I think so I think for myself, I feel like listening to a pile of music is super important because it broadens your perspective, it broadens your horizon, it gives you different, so I think like
I agree with you on that, but we're also in a time period now where it's very, very easy for people to just silo themselves off completely.
Yeah, but I think we are in a period of time where I think when people that have been studying listening habits are reporting that like people are listening to a lot of everything, right? And so I think you have a lot more people listening to punk and Carrie Underwood or whatever, right?
Sure,
or just having. I feel like we're kind of in a time where genres they don't really matter anymore, right? Like no one cares.
Right.
No one who's 25 years old cares about your post-punk scene.
That's true.
No one who's 25 years old cares about like being just a hip hop kid.
That's actually interesting because just doing this show as long as I've been doing. I interview artists of all ages, right? And you're right, the people, 35 and up, they have a more specific sense of what genre of music they play, whereas the younger bands are just like, I don't know.
This is what we do, yeah. Oh, and you do that? Cool, let's do a show together.
Yeah, exactly, right,
Yeah, and so I think, I don't think we'll ever have like a ska scene like
we did when I was in the ska band in the late 90s.
There we go. Like that won't happen again.
Yeah. Unless someone wants to start it.
And that's just fine. Please delete that. That's off the record. Yeah, that's right. But yeah, I think jazz struggles with that. I think jazz, quote unquote. And this is someone who comes to the jazz community as, admittedly a bit of an outsider, right? Yeah. I think the voices in the jazz community that want everything to just be pure jazz, I think are really detrimental to jazz because they're imposing a limitation that no one else cares about or wants or needs or has been like, if you're just saying you must be this tall to ride, to everyone who comes to your concerts, or you've got to know all of this jazz history, or you've got to know this theory, or you've got to I think as soon as you institutionalize or academify or whatever the word is.
But jazz has that. It comes with that almost.
Of course.
Right?
It comes
more than a lot of genres. So.
Yeah, because the knowledge of theory and harmony that is needed to play jazz well is exponentially higher than
punk rock.
Yeah, totally, right?
Yeah.
Like I have some very cursory theoretic knowledge and it works for what I do.
Sure.
But you stick me with a jazz quartet and I'm toast. I'm done.
Yeah.
And that's awesome, But I think the danger on the flip side of that is, if I may, is that it can become alienating, right? And so I think that, and I think within jazz there are, there's a division of people that want it to be, are the kind of more hardline traditionalists, and then there's a bunch of people that I love jazz, but I also love, whatever, and then I love this music, and I think jazz can do all these other things, and so I think I think as much as I kind of maybe talk about that traditionalist side of it as being an unhelpful side, I think within jazz there are a lot of voices, especially right now, of people saying, "Hey, let's have some fun with this."
Yeah.
Right, and I think the artists that we've got on the free stage on the Sunday.
Show is ridiculous.
That's
Comedy's coming and stuff. I can't wait for that.
The Comedy's coming. Micaiah McCraven, Donnie McCaslin. For me, those are all artists that are very much within the arms of jazz.
Yeah.
But none of them give a shit.
Yeah.
Right? All of them are about making great art and about impacting people and connecting with people and putting on a great show and letting her rip and having a good time and some of that and it's there's some punk stuff that creeps into those acts.
Sure,
there's some hip hop that creeps into those acts. There's some
elements.
EDM that pops into those acts. Sure. And so all of a sudden jazz is, those artists are moving post genre, right?
Yeah.
It's the mashup stuff that for me is super exciting.
For sure. And it's funny because jazz has always been kind of on the cutting edge too, which is why it's so weird. It's considered as this academic thing because you listen to all the avant-garde stuff in the 60s and everything, and it's still so far
Totally.
beyond what's going on
I
now.
know.
And it's weird to think of that as being treated the same way as classical, in sort of this really formalized kind of like suit and tie thing.
Yeah.
I mean, not that classical doesn't have groundbreaking stuff too. But
Yeah. But I think that's the kind of the edge that jazz has been walking on for a little while. It's like, do we become like classical music, or do we stay a living, breathing art form? Right?
Sure, yeah.
You know, and this is from a guy who loves going to the symphony. But,
yeah.
But,
well, I love the opera. Like, I mean,
But I think like classical music is it's tough and it's tired, right? And how do you animate and create and excite culture beyond that community, you know, within classical music right now? That's a big question.
Yeah, it's a whole other topic.
And I feel like jazz, by the very nature of the spontaneity that's in the music and the improvisation and the willingness to just like be in the community, you know, I think, let's talk about like the Dirty Catfish Brass Band, right? So there's an example of...
Well, they play all over the place.
They play all over the place. They'll play at the corner of River and Osborne.
Yeah.
They're playing at Bomber games. They're playing
Jets
at
games,
Jets games. They're playing, like, they'll play at a street corner. They'll play in an alley. They'll play on a stage. They'll play, like, they, you know, and I mean, part of that is the nature of that format, right? Like, if they had to plug in some amps and whatever else, that all falls apart pretty quick.
Sure.
But, you know, but that's the nature of that music that they do and the way their format is structured. And so I think that, you know, the link from them to Donny McCaslin, for example, is an easy line to see, and I think that line is also one that engages community, and engages people kind of at a really kind of ground level and base level. And I think, you know, when the history of jazz, and like when jazz first took hold and became jazz was popular music, and it was dance. It was dance music, right? It was social music. And so I think, you know, what happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s with it is that, you know, it became very academic, and, you know, maybe all music goes through that period. I'm sure there's some academic post-punk.
Oh yeah,
so,
definitely. There's probably someone who's got a research paper right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then I guess the other question, which was not really related, but I just wanted to say at the same time so I didn't forget it, was about just kind of getting those non-jazz artists to the festival, and like how much of that is kind of necessary to get, as we mentioned before, those people who maybe aren't interested in jazz yet, but they know, you know, insert indie rock artist here, or
the Laming Flips, am I right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example. My daughter went to that. Was her first show.
Yeah, awesome.
Was that Flaming Lips show? So,
that is a great first show to go to.
Yeah, she loved it.
The first 3 minutes of that concert was a celebration. It was just like confetti cannons on full tilt.
Well, that's their whole thing.
It's just like you know, and I'd seen them a few times before that, and it was always good. But that show, like, there was something else with that show that, I mean, maybe it was also just the exhaustion of being the last day of the festival. And it's like,
it's finally over and you can
I'll have any emotion, whatever emotion you got, I'll feel it right now, you know.
But I mean, they're decidedly not a jazz band.
No, of course not. What are they doing at the festival?
I mean, I know what they're doing at the festival. But like, how much of that
they're paying for the jazz
has to happen in order to make it work, though? Like, I mean, they're obviously drawing in people who maybe wouldn't have gone to a jazz festival in the first place, and maybe they're checking out other artists because the Flaming Lips are there.
Yep.
So how do you sort of balance that? Getting the jazz for the purists or the hardcore jazz fans, and then having these other artists like the Flaming Lips that will make it more wide open. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, like on my first year in 2017, on Facebook, some folks started having a little debate because, like,
I remember reading it. I think
it was based around
because
S.C. Mira played and someone didn't like S.C. Mira. And it's like, what's this doing at a jazz festival? And I think Luke Doucette from Whitehorse, so like he was friends with someone on it and he chimed in. He was like, well, you know, if this is a traditional jazz festival, it would be 2 days at the West End Cultural Center, and it would be the same 200 people every year, and that would be it. And it's kind of like that's kind of the reality. It's you know, I think you know, Dave Holland was here in 2015 and we sold 325 tickets, right? Like, here's Dave freaking Holland. But there's only 325 of you in the room, and so I think that
versus the Flaming Lips,
which sold, you know, there's 1,300 people in the room, right? And so it's not like it's just a popularity contest where where we'll just take anyone who, can sell tickets. It's not like it's that.
Yeah. There's obviously
it needs to be, it needs to be great music. But here's the thing that, like, not everyone always, I don't think, like, it's not like festival booking isn't walking down the grocery aisle in the grocery store or the cereal aisle and just being like, oh, I want this one, this one, this one.
Yeah.
It's like I sent out probably 70 offers this year, right?
Yeah. The timing's got to work, the money's got to work, all that stuff.
Totally, right. And so all of the jazz festivals try as best as we can to work together and so that, everyone in, so us in Saskatoon and sometimes Edmonton and then Vancouver and sometimes Victoria will try to offer on an artist so that we can make it financially worth their while to come into Western Canada.
Makes sense, yeah.
And then we all get that show and it all works. And so this year we worked on a whole bunch of stuff, and some of it fell apart in the last minute and some of it didn't happen, and some of it, we thought it was going to come together and we were all kind of like super excited, and then something changed. They got an offer in Europe, it all falls apart.
Sure,
yeah. And so I think the fluidity of the booking process and the fact that we're such a small market and that our dollar sucks. Yeah. Right? So they all work against us. And so, so in August or September, I'm sending out first offers for the next year's festival. And, you can't get too attached or excited to it because, that, like, they're not even going to really get looked at till October and November. And then, if there aren't any other anchor dates for them, then it becomes a pretty quick no. Because, like, if I offer on an artist and, and she just doesn't have Minneapolis or Saskatoon and Calgary or whatever is needed to make that Winnipeg show worthwhile, it falls apart pretty quick. Yeah, exactly. And so, artists want to be able to do like a 3 to 7 show run, right? To make that work, kind of depending on a bunch of stuff.
Sure.
And so at the end of the day, it's, part of it's money, right? Can we pay the artist what they want?
Yeah.
Do we think we can sell enough tickets to that artist? Like, that's a consideration. Who's even available, right? Like, I can say, I want to book Nora Jones and I don't know, throw me some I'm going to book Bublé and Nora next year, right?
But even aside from the money, they might not even be around.
Yeah, they could be like, well, no, sir, they're doing New York, Atlanta, Mexico City that week. Okay, so I was like, great. Well, they can go make their, do that. So it's go ahead.
No, I was going to say, are the criticisms about, like, when you have someone like Flaming Lips, who are there, obviously bring a big crowd, obviously they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
If you get people saying, well, they're not jazz, why are they there? Is that just kind of a hazard of the job? Where you
have
that every year?
Like, I don't really care. Like, if that's like, if you can't see that we're also presenting like way more jazz than anyone else anywhere near us.
Yeah. Well, this year is especially heavy on, like, very heavy on jazz.
So much amazing jazz this year. And I still saw some guy's Facebook post like, oh, there's no jazz this year. I was like, come on, man.
So much,
It's like, you become a parody of yourself.
Yeah.
And
so you just kind of let that slide?
Oh yeah, no, you can't. Like, it doesn't. Who cares? It's like, it's tired and it's unhelpful.
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's
most people are going to see. They're going to understand why these artists are here, and they're going to want to probably see them and the jazz artists too. Right?
Totally. And like, let's talk about the Flaming Lips, because just like, I mean, that's a great fucking band.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, that was an amazing show, and it's like, no, it's not a jazz show. Of course not. No. But it's a celebration of humanity in music.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a great time, and it fell into our lap.
Yeah.
It was also like, it was not on the radar at all until the very last, kind of like the last minute.
Oh, cool.
All of a sudden, like, Saskatoon calls me up and he's like, hey, I think I can get us the Flaming Lips. All right, let's do it. It's like, of course
you say no to them.
Yeah. Do you say, oh no, he doesn't, they never made a jazz record.
There's no trumpet player.
There's no trumpet player, can't do it. No, of course not. You say, let's make this work. This is amazing. Yeah. So I think, I think
that's not unique to here either, right? I mean, like, a lot of jazz festivals, lineups, and it'll be
look who's headlining. Like, the other thing, like, the people that like to complain about the lack of jazz, it's like, look at every jazz festival in the world.
Yeah.
Every single jazz festival is wrestling with the same thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Which is that the jazz audience is small and shrinking, and that, in order to bring attention to some of those artists, you need to, like, what we call I think we use the term jazz adjacent.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think I think, you know, the Flaming Lips are probably adjacent, right? So
Yeah.
let's forget about that. But like Daniel Caesar,
Sure. Yeah.
there was so much.
Yeah.
There's so much jazz in that show.
Yeah.
Like what that band is playing, there's a pile of improvisation. You know, some of the harmony that they're using. It's like there was so much. And in No Name's show this year, like what people are going to experience with No Name, like, you know, there's a pile of jazz in those artists. And I think also to like hip hop has so many deep ties.
The connections are crazy.
Yeah, right. Like hip hop.
Even on the surface, if you don't see them, you just give it a listen for 5 minutes. And
Totally. I mean, hip hop doesn't exist without jazz.
Sure.
And lots of music, like soul, doesn't exist without jazz.
Yeah.
R&B doesn't exist without jazz. And so, like this festival is like Janelle Monáe, John Legend.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's been a good, really great crop of soul singers that have come through, and that totally has a place at a jazz festival.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And so
Absolutely,
I think, you know, so I think that.
Well, there's a long history of soul singers also being jazz, like Ray Charles,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
I mean, like, you know.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, for us, that all makes a pile of sense,
Yeah.
right? And it's an extension of the same. It's an extension of the same cultural line, and so, you know, so I think like, you know, Montreux in Switzerland, one of the
they
top.
had Wu-Tang in one of their shows.
Yeah,
I have the DVD.
yeah, you know, and like, there's this band from the UK called Daughter, and I really love this band Daughter, and like Daughter played Montreux, and they are not, you know, I booked the Joy Formidable a couple of years ago,
Right.
and like they're not a jazz band,
Right.
and Daughter's kind of in that like, you know, UK kind of guitar riffy, anthemic stuff, and like they play Montreux, and it's like Montreux's like the doors are wide open, right?
Yeah.
The North Sea Jazz Festival, the doors are wide open. The Montreal Jazz Festival, the doors are wide open. New Orleans, grandmama of them all, the doors are wide open.
Why not Winnipeg?
Like so if you're complaining about the Flaming Lips at you know, at the Jazz Festival in Winnipeg, like, well, like whatever.
Well, I mean, and I'm definitely like I said, I get why. And I've seen a lot of artists at the Jazz Fest over the years that I definitely wouldn't consider to be jazz, but I was happy that they were coming to Winnipeg.
Totally.
I don't care how they ended up getting here. It's like that's how they have to get here. Then that's perfect.
Totally. Like Killer Mike a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Like that remains one of the best shows, you know. And I think like a festival, you know, kind of all this other stuff aside, a festival, you know, has a responsibility to serve the community, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that community is more than just the jazz purists, right? And so I think that it's important to us that the kids that hang out at the Goodwill find some acts that they can see at the festival, and the kids that hang out at Times can find some stuff that they want to see at the festival, and the people
then the return customers too.
Totally,
right?
and the people that, you know, might normally just go to the folk festival. Oh, Colin Linden's playing this year. I love Colin Linden.
Sure,
you know, let's go see Colin. So I think like for us, it's about making sure that our tent is broad.
Okay.
And I think that benefits Winnipeg because they get to see more music.
Yeah.
It benefits jazz in Winnipeg because it means that there are more people with their eyes on jazz in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And
it helps the artists too. The local ones,
it helps the artists. There's more opening slots. There's more opportunities, and so I think, you know, and I think especially with Old Market Square and some of the stuff we're doing there, all of a sudden now we get to present some stuff that normally we would have to, you know, put on a ticketed bill and put it at the West End Cultural Center and you know, and use the revenue stream somewhere else to kind of underwrite some of that stuff. And now let's get people to fall in love with this music, right? This music's amazing.
It is.
Let's build that audience for it. Let's get those artists coming back and back and back, and kind of taking that model where we can actually help build careers for people. And so.
Sure. While still appealing to the purists who want to hear it.
Totally.
That's there for them.
Because we're going to book that too. We will always have that as well. Like it's like that is never going to leave the festival, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, and I think for, you know, if there are local musicians who kind of look at this and like don't quite see how all these puzzle pieces fit together, I totally get that.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, this is also stuff that, you know, they're not getting taught at school. It's not part of, you know, how the jazz program, you know, the business side of things isn't really, they're not getting, that's not part of that education really. And it's also not part of most people's experience, most musicians' experience in this city, right? And so I think that, so I fully get how there's some people that like might have their like, you know, have some questions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure, sure.
And I guess from my end, it's like, well, my door's open anytime.
Yeah,
I'm an easygoing guy. If you want to talk, give me a call. Let's chat. Let's go grab a coffee or a beer and have a chat. And, you know, I'm more than happy to kind of talk through this stuff with people any old time because I think it's vital.
Well, it
I
probably
think
helps you too, right? In terms of what people want to see.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. And I think also, you know, I think some of those skills that I learned by hustling my own band and then also hustling other bands, you know, like those apply to the jazz world as well, right?
Sure, sure.
You know, like if we look at someone like Joel Ross, vibes player in New York, he's on the come up right now, and he's hustling, right?
Yeah.
And there's artists in Toronto and Montreal that are touring the world constantly.
Yeah.
You know, there are artists in Edmonton that are doing that. Audrey Okoa is coming to Winnipeg. She's a trombonist from Edmonton, and you know, she's not playing groundbreaking jazz,
right?
But she's a phenomenal musician, great writer, has her shit together,
right?
And has a good team around her, and is doing it on a pretty broad level now, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what I, you know, if there are any local musicians that are listening to this podcast,
I think that's the only people who do this podcast, honestly.
Well, I've either made great friends or great enemies.
Right,
we'll
right,
see.
Right.
I'm not a man for the middle. You know, this stuff is like, there's models of success out there. That's kind of what I want to be able to show people, is that there are models of success, and you can do it, and our office is open, is there to help, right? Like anyone who wants that but doesn't know how those puzzle pieces fit together, I'm happy to chat anytime. And if I can't answer questions, I'll help you find the people that can. And because I really want this city to have a great scene that flourishes and is visible, you know, beyond our borders. And I think it's been, you know, it's been really sequestered for a long time. And I think what is, you know, what I didn't always realize, or, you know, I think as someone who came to the jazz community a bit more as an outsider maybe, is that there was one person who was limiting things a lot more than they needed to be. And so I think that and did some extensive damage in that way. And so I think, you know, from our office, we want to help people kind of lay the foundation for a career that can, you know, be more than just playing in restaurants in the corners, and actually have your name on the marquee, and build something real that you can sell tickets around.
I think that's maybe a good place to end it, actually. It's a very fitting ending. But just before we do that, if people, you know, I'm not going to assume people are listening to this not knowing what the Jazz Fest is. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty high-profile Winnipeg event. But where do people find tickets? Where do they find information about who's playing? What's the best option to sort of do all that stuff? For sure.
jazzwinnipeg.com is our website. All of our tickets and our events and everything are available there. And so we're trying to present more and more shows outside of the festival as well now. Yeah. So I don't know. Let's keep making some great music.
Cool. And if people want to hear more episodes of this show, including interviews with people who are playing the festival this year, which is kind of cool. It's always nice to see that people who, you know, I've talked to once when they're starting out or whatever are now, you know, stepping up and getting to that level. You can go to witchpolice.com. All 390 whatever episodes are there for free download and streaming.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's getting ridiculous. You can also tune in on Sundays at midnight on UMFM, and they play older episodes that have kind of a few months after they come out as a podcast. So by the time this airs on UMFM, the festival will be over. Yeah. But like you said, Jazz Winnipeg's doing a lot of shows kind of outside of the festival, and there's always next year, right? So
totally. Yeah, exactly.